reflection for September. We're going to be focusing in on Mark chapter 7, verses 31 to 37. Repeating Mark 7, verses 31 to 37. So you're welcome to put the video on hold, go grab a Bible, and come back and join me and get a cup of coffee, and let's just spend a few minutes reflecting and thinking. This is going to be more of a reflective style, not more of a preaching style. I'm hoping that works for you. For those who are in the Facebook group, there's going to be a series of questions I'm going to ask to help encourage some interaction and discussion. I'd meant to do this all live. Something came up, I'm not able to do that live. So I'm doing this to try and create community by the ability that we have to interact on our own time with questions that have been asked about the passage. So this is an interesting passage with a chunk of potential controversy. Mark chapter 7, verse 31. Then he returned from the region of Tyre and went by way of Sidon toward the Sea of Galilee, in the region of Decapolis. They brought to him a deaf man who had an impediment in his speech, and they begged him to lay his hand on him. He took him to the side in private, away from the crowd, and he put his fingers into his ears, and he spat and touched his tongue. Then looking up into heaven, he said, "Be opened." And his ears were opened, and his tongue released, and he spoke plainly. Then Jesus ordered them to tell no one. But the more he ordered them, the more zealously they proclaimed it, saying, "He has done everything well. He even makes the deaf to hear and the mute to speak." The title of today's reflection is Embrace the Pain. Embrace the pain. Around 2 years ago, social media posts by people with cancer started appearing in my social media accounts. I noticed these coming by me on my FYP. Some of the posts were very, very moving. The last few months for Jace have been challenging. He started cancer treatments when he was 25. Recently, he made a post on social media about embracing the negative, such as pain, sadness, anxiety. Jace states that embracing those feelings will help us feel better. Toward the end of his post, he says, "I embrace what I need to. I let it suck, and then I let it go." I noticed a video by Ben, a teenager who was waiting for an emergency surgery. The video was a bit of a tearjerker. I found myself cheering in a different video when Ben was dancing with nurses in the hospital. I don't know how a person can possibly dance when they've got tubes hanging out of them. Somehow, Ben did it. In a recent post on social media, he said, "Why I love my scars." And he pointed out the scars that he had, drawing our attention to those scars. He believes his scars helped him to remember that he would not be alive without the scars. The strength is far more important than appearance. That he was given a second chance, and that he pushed through something really tough. Ben embraced the pain and found insights and healing. In the story, it just appears to so many of us as a simple story in the gospel about healing a person who is deaf. But it's actually not a simple and a non-controversial story. Because there's deaf culture, there's American Sign Language and other formalized languages for deaf people. Some deaf people might not feel comfortable with the sense that deaf people need to be healed. Deafness seems to be about as old as humanity. Evidence found in humans around 10,000 years ago and in Neanderthal skeletons between 35 and 45,000 years ago shows us that there were deaf people then. The deaf website indicates there's evidence of sign languages that have existed as long as spoken language. The healing of the deaf person is important. A history article indicates that about 10% of the world's population is deaf. The article seems to include people who have mild hearing loss in that total number. An early reference to either deaf or hearing impaired people appears to date back to about 1550 BCE, before the Common Era. There's an ancient Egyptian document from that time that has a remedy for those who do not hear well. Plato seemed to think that deaf people communicate with gestures. Unfortunately, Plato also thought that deaf people were not likely to be as intelligent as other individuals. Now, people who are hearing impaired may have a voice that sounds slightly different than other people. And that might be why the person in this biblical passage is described as having a speech impediment. I find myself thinking about this deaf man. Was the deaf man wanting to be healed? What was he thinking when Jesus healed him? Did he want to be healed? Was that important to him? Or was it possibly more important to family and friends who felt uncomfortable in the presence of a deaf person, befriending a deaf person? Was he part of a deaf community? When he was restored to full hearing, did he lose his deaf community? An article in Atlantic magazine indicates the assumption that deaf people want to be cured is far from true. A Psychology Today article by Walter Vett discusses potential developments that might reverse hereditary deafness. The research resulted in denunciations for discrimination against deaf people. I gather that Sarah Cates, a Discovery Magazine opinion piece article, said that the research is only understood of progress if there's an assumption that deafness actually needs a cure. It does not. Though our dominant view of deafness needs a fix. I find myself relating to this concern about, does deafness need a cure, or is it society needing a cure? For many years, homosexuality was considered to be a mental illness. In time, mental health and physical health professionals came to the conclusion that gay and bisexual people are fully capable of living healthy and productive lives, and that being gay is not a mental illness. As a gay man, I do not believe homosexuality needs to be cured, but homophobia and transphobia may need a fix, possibly a big fix. In my opinion, having a disabled family member or friend could result in a reduction in respect, prestige, and status, In ancient Palestine, being the friend of a handicapped person might have been considered to be essentially being the friend of a sinner. Some Pharisees attacked Jesus for eating with tax collectors and sinners. You might remember the story in John's Gospel of Jesus healing the blind man. In this narrative, Jesus is asked by the disciples, who was the one that sinned, this blind man or his parents? Jesus said neither sinned. A few people of faith still believe disabilities are caused either by sin or by not having adequate faith. This religious belief can stigmatize people and isolate people with disabilities. Just the sight of a cane, a walker, a wheelchair, a white cane can cause a person to take a detour to avoid interacting with a disabled person. If you are a person with a visible disability, people might avoid you too. And if you are a friend or a family member with a person who's disabled, they may take that wide detour around you as well as your friend or family member. There are formal and informal communities of differently abled people. I suspect the deaf community may be more formally organized. When my father started to lose some of his ability, he seemed to kind of gravitate to spending time at church with another man who had the same disability. They did not talk much. Largely, they just sat together at potlucks. I think there was no need for them to speak because they understood each other. When I am in part of the LGBT plus community, there are things I don't need to talk about. We understand. We all need places where we don't have to explain or defend who we are. Many disabled people are embracing the pain of prejudice, discrimination, stigma, social isolation. They may be proclaiming their status. There's a disability pride flag. I have one of those flags. The flag is not as colorful or cheerful as the rainbow flag, but it's still meaningful. A young person saw me with a disability flag, and he proudly announced to me, I am disabled. Many years ago, when researching information for students who are classified as having learning disabilities, I discovered an interesting website. The website was Learning Disability Pride. I was very happy to see the website. It was promoting pride among people who have learning disabilities. And it reminded me of Black Pride and Gay Pride. The current Learning Disability Pride website says it was inspired by Deaf Pride. Neurodiverse people can take pride in who they are. Perhaps God is calling congregations, and especially affirming or largely LGBT plus congregations, to reach out more like a source of pride for disabled people. The first Pride Parade I took part in was shortly after I was asked to leave a church for reasons related to my theology regarding LGBTQ plus individuals. I went from being told never to come back, never to talk to anybody, to hearing people cheer as I walked past. Being in a parade like that is affirming and healing. I've been in pride parades where you could hardly hear yourself think because the cheering was so loud. When people with different skills and abilities come to church, they need to hear us cheering. Our cheering can help drown out the feelings and the sounds of shame from other people and those that have become internalized. There's something else we might see in this passage. When humanity was not interested in God, Creator God chose to embrace the pain and rejection and to embrace people. Embracing that pain brought healing. Jesus hung around with people that no one else wanted to be with. He spent time with the outcasts, sex trade workers, tax collectors, sinners. His ministry embraced those who were sick and people who were handicapped. There's an old saying that goes to the effect, when the mountain will not come to Muhammad, Muhammad goes to the mountain. Wiktionary says this basically means you may need to use a different approach. You can use a different approach to reach your goals when you're not able to command that something happen, that something be done. Churches are no longer in a position to say, come to church, it's good for you, and then expect the church to be filled. That used to be the case, not so much anymore. The mountain of humanity will no longer come to the church just because we ask them to. We have to go to humanity. We have to go to the world and meet the world where the rubber meets the road, meet the world on those avenues and intersections where people are. Meet the world at work, at play, at recreation, in coffee shops, cafes. Some of the ways that we can meet the world is to take the spirit of the risen Christ with us to the world. And that means that we actively seek out and affirm those who are stigmatized and who the world rejects. Now, it's again for those who are on Facebook. I'm going to post a series of questions that you are very, very welcome to answer and respond to and interact with. Thank you for joining live, for those who were able to join live, and I look forward to talking to everyone another time.